In an earlier video, we looked at some of Python's built-in functions. In this video, we're going to see how we can write our own function. And in Python, when you define a function, you have some things you have to include, including this keyword def for define. Then you follow def with the name of the function, and that's up to you to decide what you want to call it. Here we're calling our function triple. And then in parentheses, you're going to put variables for your inputs. And here we have a single input. We're using the variable x for that. Another name for an input is a parameter. And the inputs are surrounded by parentheses. And then we have a colon. And then underneath that first line of the function, we put the code that belongs to that function. And in this case, all we have is a single return statement that tells us what the function is going to return, what it is going to output. So here, for whatever value we input, x, we're going to get back as the output 3 times x. So if we input 5, we'll get back 15. If we input 10, we'll get back 30. And this is what the return statement is used for. And you have to begin with the keyword return, and then you can put whatever is the appropriate expression for the value that you want to send back. Now it's really important that the lines that belong to a function are indented underneath the initial def line. So we always want to indent, and typically we're going to indent 4 spaces. So you can see I've got the Spyder window open, and using the configuration that we told you about, I have the editor window on the left-hand side, the IPython console on the right-hand side. And I've put the function that we talked about a moment ago in the editor window in a Python file. Okay? And then the one thing that I've added that is new is this line right here. That is known as a docstring. It's a special kind of comment that describes what the function does. And docstrings begin with 3 quotes, quote, 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 and they end with 3 quotes. Then what I do once I have the function in my Python file is I run that file. I come up here to this little play icon. I click it. And you'll notice that I get my little run file message. It's telling me that I ran that file. But I don't get any output. And that's because this particular Python file only contains function definitions. It doesn't actually print anything. And I'm only going to see output over here from my program if I print something. But once I run that file, I can then call the function from the IPython console. So for example, if I type in 555 and I hit enter, you can see it tells me that the result of that function call is 15. That's the value that's being returned by that call. If instead I do triple 1.5, then I get back as a result 4.5. I can even pass in a string. If you multiply a string, you end up getting a new string that contains multiple copies of the original. So for example, if I pass in the string hello, the result is the string hello, hello, hello. So that's how we can interact with our functions and test them to make sure that they work correctly. Now, in the rest of this video and going forward, we're again going to be using a different environment, an older environment, in which we have 2 separate windows. The editor window is one window, and then we have another window which we call the Python shell. And remember, the Python shell is essentially the same thing as the IPython console. So when you see those, don't get thrown by it. Just remember that the editor is the left-hand side of Spyder, and the shell is the same thing as the IPython console. Here are 2 other functions, and you can see that it's possible for a function to have multiple lines that are part of it, and see how they're all indented the same amount. So this function is called circle area. It takes a single value, which is the diameter of the circle. It computes the radius using division, assigns that to a variable. Then it computes the area, and notice how we're doing exponentiation here, squaring the radius. multiplying it by an approximation of pi, storing that in a variable called area, and then we return whatever value is in that variable. Here is an example of a function that takes multiple parameters. So it's called rect_parim. It takes the length of a rectangle L and the width of that same rectangle. And notice how you have to have a comma in between the parameters if you have more than one. And then we're returning twice the length plus twice the width. Now you can see I've put these two functions in my Python file. And if I now save that and then run it, I can now call these functions from the shell. So if I do circle area 20, you can see I get the area of that circle. If I do rect_parim 5, 7, I get the parameter of the rectangle whose length is 5 and width is 7. Now, it's also possible to call your functions from within the Python file itself, from within the program file. But when you do that, you typically want to make sure you're not just putting the function call, right? Because if all you do, down here it's fine to do that. Putting the function call at the shell prompt will show you the output. But from your program, that won't work. So for example, if I just copy that call up here and I save it and I run it, you can see we don't get any output at all. In order to have a program display the result of a calculation or a function call, you have to use print. And so up here what you can do is put the function call inside a print statement, and then the return value will replace that function call and get printed. So now if I save it and run it, we'll see the result. Finally, let's trace through this program in detail. So I'm assuming that we have this function here, and we'll see what it does in a minute. And then we have a print statement that's part of the same program. And when you trace through code, it can help to have a table for yourself. You can just use a piece of paper with one column for each variable. And that's what I've done here. So when we run this, the first thing that's going to happen is the function gets defined. That doesn't produce any output, it just goes ahead and processes that function so that Python knows about it. And then we'll come down here to the print statement. But before we can print anything, we have to make the function call. And you can see here that we're passing in 3 for x and 2 for y. So that's the first thing that happens when you have a function call. The values that are specified for the parameters are passed in and assigned to the variables in the function header. So in this case, it's as if we had written these two assignments. X is assigned 3, y is assigned 2. Then we jump to that function and we begin executing it. So we say take the value of y and assign it to a, and so a's value is 2. I'm putting that in my table to keep track of that. Then we take the current value of x, add 1, that gives us 4, and we assign it to b. And then finally we return the result of this expression. So we first need to actually do that evaluation. So a gets replaced by its value, b gets replaced by its value, and then we add 3 to give us 9. And then that return value is sent back to where the function call was made. So here's where we made the function call. And the function call is replaced by that return value. So it's as if we had written print 9, because calculate 3, 2 is replaced by 9. And then the program picks up where it left off. In this case, it has to finish the print statement, and so it's going to go ahead and print that final value, which is 9.